British police have arrested the founder of the WikiLeaks website, Julian Assange.
Dragged the WikiLeaks founder out of his sanctuary after the Ecuadorian government.
WikiLeaks played a role not just as a publisher, they had become a conspirator.
This was an act that would solicit revenge. An independent, untarnished truth seeker that exposed shadowy practices.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories that we're covering this week. Out of the embassy and heading for the courts, Ecuador pulls the plug on Julian Assange. What lies ahead for him and WikiLeaks? Malaysia's 1MDB scandal is one of the world's biggest cases of government corruption. It took a while, but journalists finally got the story out. And a coup in Khartoum after chants of a revolution go viral. When it comes to media personalities and stories about the news and journalism, there are few that come bigger than Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. And this past week, there have been developments. After nearly 7 years at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, Assange was dragged out of the building by British police in response to an extradition request from the United States. Assange stands charged with a conspiracy to commit computer intrusion. We will be speaking with a WikiLeaks editor, Christian Hrabson, in a few moments. But first, some detail on the charges and the timing of Julian Assange's arrest. This arrest was a long time coming. For years, Julian Assange said that Washington was building a case against him, working towards his extradition to the U.S. for publishing classified Defense Department documents on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Come on, fire!
And State Department documents and emails, the so-called diplomatic cables that exposed the ugly side of American foreign policy. This past week, Assange was proven right. However, the indictment released by the U.S. Department of Justice does not, as many predicted, charge Assange under the Espionage Act for publishing classified information. Such a prosecution would have opened the door to criminal investigations of other news organizations, including mainstream media outlets that published WikiLeaks' material. Instead, the DOJ has charged Assange under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, accusing him of proactively helping his source, Chelsea Manning, log into Defense Department computers to get the documents in question. Regardless of which law U.S. authorities are charging Assange under, press freedom advocates have warned that the criminalization of what Assange does stand accused of, such as the use of encrypted messaging, concealing a source's identity, and using secure drop boxes, all common reporting practices, could have precedent-setting implications for journalism in the U.S. and beyond. Let's start with the context and the question, why now? Given that Ecuador took Julian Assange in 7 years ago, does the decision to expel him from the embassy and probably place him at the mercy of the U.S. justice system simply come down to the fact that the president who initially gave him asylum, Rafael Correa, is no longer in power, having been replaced by the new president, Lenin Moreno?
That's exactly what happened. The only change that was in the scenario was the fact that there was a regime change in Ecuador, and the president came in that was willing to bow to the pressure or willing to curry favors with the Trump administration. There had been reports that he, in the New York Times in December, that he was willing to hand Julian Assange over to the Trump administration in exchange for debt relief or favors at the IMF. So it didn't come as a surprise, and therefore there has been an increased pressure inside the Ecuadorian embassy in trying to force him out, and it ended in this manner this week.
Edward Snowden was among the people who tweeted on this right away, and he said images of Ecuador's ambassador inviting the UK secret police into the embassy to drag a publisher of, like it or not, award-winning journalism out of the building are going to end up in the history books. Assange's critics may cheer, but this is a dark moment for press freedom. How do you see this precedent?
I totally agree with Snowden on this. It is a very dark day, and it sets a precedent that is totally very dangerous for journalists, editors, publishers all around the world. If you can extradite a journalist to a third country, to the United States, for publishing the truth, no journalist can be secure So this must be stopped. This must be resisted in all manner. This has to unify journalists around this cause, whatever they may think about Julian Assange.
Prosecutors allege that in March of 2010, Julian Assange agreed to assist Chelsea Manning, his source, in cracking a password that would allow Manning to get access to some of those classified U.S. Defense Department documents that would later be released through WikiLeaks. Did that in fact happen, and how problematic will that be for Julian Assange's case?
Well, this communication, alleged communication between Julian and Chelsea Manning has been out in the open for years. There is a reference here to an alleged communication between a journalist and a source. And what is dragged forth there? There's a quote there that Julian Assange allegedly said to Chelsea Manning, "Curious eyes never run dry." And that is supposed to be a proof of conspiracy. It's outrageous. Let's not forget the fact that Chelsea Manning was sentenced to 35 years in prison. She served 7 years of that time. She has now been hauled back into prison for refusing to testify against Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So this has been the escalation now. We have Chelsea Manning in prison. We also have Julian Assange in prison. So it's coming to a finale in the saga where a journalist, a publisher, and an editor is going to face prison time for doing what journalists are supposed to be doing.
The charges in the U.S. carry a maximum jail time of 5 years. First of all, do you take the U.S. Justice Department at its word on that?
No, I mean, there are two things to consider here. First, there's a reference to hacking here and being reported in media as conspiracy or hacking, which is a very strange depiction of this. But secondly, this is only at the tip of the iceberg. We are absolutely certain that this is only one of the charges that will be brought on Julian Assange, and there will be added on more charges when he arrives, if he arrives in the United States in chains. It's specifically presented in this manner, in our opinion, to increase the likelihood that he will be extradited, because people will say, well, it's only 5 years.
So many news outlets published material furnished to them by WikiLeaks over your busiest period. There were the Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs, the U.S. diplomatic cables. There was a feeding frenzy among mainstream media news organizations with that material. The New York Times, for instance, published WikiLeaks material, commodified it, turned it into clicks, profited from it, and published an editorial yesterday in which it kind of sat on the fence, whereas The Guardian in the UK said extraditing Assange is wrong. The New York Times sat on the fence and wrote a very carefully worded editorial on that. What do you make of the way news outlets have covered this story this week?
Well, they have been trying to play it very safe, and it seems to me that the New York Times, I read that editorial, seem to be content to fall on that plot, to say, well, this is not charges for publication. This is not charges for journalism, but something totally different. They are falling into buying the narrative of the Trump administration, which I think is disgraceful. We all know what this is about. It's about the revelations of war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan. That is what it's about. The Guardian changed its tune. We have been very critical of the Guardian, and we have to take them to court for a libelous and fabricated story they printed on November 27, which was a very dangerous one, the one on the allegation that Paul Manafort had somehow secretly had a meeting in the Ecuadorian embassy on 3 occasions, which is, everybody knows, is a total fabrication. They will not retract it.
Written by Luke Harding.
Written by Luke Harding and Dan Collins at and with the help of a third party from Ecuador, actually. So the Guardian changed the tone and came to the right conclusion on this issue.
Do you think Julian Assange can get a fair trial in the U.S.? Do you think he can get a fair extradition hearing in the UK? Which is more likely, in your view?
Well, if I would take into account the snarky comments by the judge last week about him being a narcissistic personality and what have you, which thought was totally outrageous.
So you don't have high hopes?
I do not have high hopes in the UK court system. As with trial in the United States, it's totally impossible to have a fair trial in the United States. If you consider the harsh words from high officials throughout the years and now from members of the Trump administration, there's no chance that he was going to have a fair trial there.
Jeremy Corbyn, the British opposition leader, has come out and said flat out that the extradition of Julian Assange to the U.S. for exposing evidence of atrocities in Iraq and Afghanistan should be opposed by the British government. Can UK politicians make a difference, or is it too late for that?
Of course they can make a difference, and we are really thankful for the support of politicians to this cause. And they have an effect on public opinion. They might even be in office when this comes to a finale in the courts here. Of course they make a difference, just as in the same manner that outrageous comments by politicians in the United States make it totally impossible for a fair trial there.
This case is about more than Julian Assange. It's about the precedent and the chill that it may set amongst other news organizations. I'm wondering how effective WikiLeaks can be with Julian Assange behind bars. You've been with the organization for 10 years. You're now an editor. Are you going to continue to publish information at the rate that you have been?
We have been, of course, restrained by this situation that Julian has been in for years. But we have tried to work around it, and we've had ways and means to do that. There have been weeks and months where Julian has been without any ability to communicate with the outside world, except through lawyers and a couple of colleagues that go in. So we are able to work around it, and WikiLeaks will continue its work.
Christian Hrabson, thank you very much for joining us here at the Listening Post today.
Thanks for having me.
Last week, Malaysia's former Prime Minister, Najib Razak, went on trial over one of the biggest corruption scandals the world has ever seen. The media shorthand for the case is 1MDB. It involves a sovereign wealth fund by the same name that Najib set up. It lost billions, almost $700 million of which is alleged to have ended up in his own bank account. The Malaysian media are all over the story, but it wasn't always that way. Under Najib's government, there were clear red lines that reporters and the news outlets they work for feared to cross. And if not for a British journalist running a website out of London, one business newspaper in Kuala Lumpur, and a secret meeting that took place in Singapore, Malaysians might not know about any of this. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now with the media backstory behind the 1MDB scandal.
Is the upcoming trial of the former Prime Minister Datuk Sri Najib Tun Razak.
To all 7 charges, but his court appearance
this trial and all the media attention around it was probably the last thing Najib Razak wanted. 3 years ago, when he was still in power, he tried to throw the media off the scent, publicly requesting that all investigation into the 1MDB scandal be left to him.
Rather than conduct a trial by media, we must wait for the outcome of these investigations.
I don't think that there is a, trial by the media.
There's no such thing as a trial by media.
There's also no trial by the public. I think it's an exaggerated charge.
How can you have the biggest trial ever in Malaysian history subjected to a sort of privacy order?
Good afternoon, Dato' Zuri.
It's ridiculous to stop the media from covering the world's biggest case of kleptocracy.
This case is a global corruption scandal involving the State Development Fund Najib himself set up in 2009, One Malaysia Development Berhad, 1MDB. Under his watch, the fund lost $4.5 billion through shell companies and opaque transactions, now being investigated across 12 countries. $681 million of that, according to US prosecutors, has been found in Najib's personal bank account.
If any wrongdoing is found, I can assure you that appropriate action will be taken against those responsible.
3 years later, it turns out Najib was the one responsible. Public anger against him and his party thrust a newly united opposition into power.
Certain heads must fall.
And today, Najib is facing more than 40 charges of money laundering, bribery, and abuse of power. And the media, both foreign and domestic, are out in force.
The media in Malaysia were prevented from reporting on it, and laws were in fact used to crack down on the media that reported or wanted to report on 1MDB. So when the former Prime Minister is facing this trial, in a way it is politically significant for the media that in the past was controlled, could actually be seeing a new dawn and one that has a lot more opening report on high-profile cases and also political issues.
Despite the measures Najib took to stifle reporting into 1MDB's suspicious dealings, the scandal was eventually broken by the media. The first investigative piece was published in 2013 by an online business portal called Kinabiz, now defunct, examining whether 1MDB was in fact a giant Ponzi scheme. Then the story was picked up by two outlets in particular, a London-based blog, The Sarawak Report, founded by journalist Claire Rucastle-Brown, and a Kuala Lumpur-based business paper, The Edge, that just wouldn't let the story go.
We started doing a lot of stories, asking a lot of questions about what has happened at 1MDB. So this was going on throughout 2014. We came together in January or February of 2015 when we connected with Claire.
I constructed a deal whereby The Edge obtained the material from Xavier Justo, who was a former director of the first joint venture partner with 1MDB. It was an extraordinary cache of documents and information exposing an extraordinary crime. Malaysia Kini, The Edge, Free Malaysia, these outfits did a terrific job in disseminating what they could on 1MDB, but they couldn't write about it in the way that I did because they were in a jurisdiction that was controlled by Najib.
And that's crucial to how the rest of the story unfolded. The Sarawak Report continued its investigations from London, protected from the reaches of Malaysian law. For Ho Kay Tat, publisher of The Edge, as well as some of his colleagues, it was a different story.
We were under a lot of pressure. I mean, you are writing a big expose on a big financial scandal in a government-owned company, a company that was started by the Prime Minister at that time, Najib. So it was unprecedented. It was not an easy environment to work under. And we always knew that the media laws are such that the government can shut us down anytime, which they did eventually.
The Edge was shut down. Its sister site, The Malaysia Insider, was blocked, along with two others, Asia Sentinel and Medium. And journalists at the news site Malaysia Kini were arrested, all for trying to cover 1MDB. Their coverage highlighted something many Malaysians already knew, that the country's media landscape had a split running right through it. While online publishers were leading the journalistic charge, mainstream news outlets, particularly those with close ties to the government, were either unwilling or unable to touch the story. Zaini Hassan was deputy editor of Utusan Malaysia, a government-affiliated newspaper. The close relationship between his paper and power meant certain red lines could not be crossed. 1MDB was one of them.
I think it came as no surprise that there were not much coverage. They were clearly controlled through the policy of fear. On top of that, many laws also used to control, or if I may use the word, to shackle, the freedoms of the media.
And that was corresponded by what we saw as a rise in the number of cases of individuals, whether you're journalists, you're bloggers, you're activists, who came under the Communications and Multimedia Act. So they were investigated, they were arrested and also charged under the law. The Communications and Multimedia Act was very actively used.
And not only did he fall back on the existing very oppressive legislation in terms of the multimedia acts that existed, he sought to add one of the world's first formal fake news acts. The Anti-Fake News Act was a direct attempt at intimidating the population at large. And it was a direct attempt at bringing the same controls over individual social media that this regime had exercised for decades over the mainstream press. This new law was Najib's belated attempt to silence the discussion on 1MDB.
The Anti-Fake News Act, like Najib's time left in office, was to be short-lived. A few months after Najib's successor, Mahathir Mohamad, took office, he did away with the law. In an ironic twist, however, Najib has, over the past year, launched a fully-fledged campaign to try and rebrand himself, as well as paint his trial as a politicized vendetta, all on social media. But the Malaysian media aren't falling for it. Not even those who were once part of the mainstream. They say they've learned their lesson.
I left the Sun in November last year, and then we set up a news portal where I believe in these freedoms, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expressions and so on. It's a milestone to the Malaysian journalism. You know, don't do the same mistake again. And I think this is a good opening for the Malaysian media. And I hope that we maintain with these freedoms, we maintain with this integrity, we maintain with this transparency.
1MDB is no longer taboo. All the media companies, they're giving it full maximum coverage. It's a topic that the public wants to know. It's an important story, and they now have the freedom to report it. So, yeah, it's a field day actually for the media to report on 1MDB now.
6 years ago, Malaysian media broke the story of the 1MDB scandal. Najib Razak pushed back.
Rather than conduct a trial by media, we must wait for the outcome of these investigations.
Now, as he stands trial for one of the world's biggest cases of kleptocracy, the media Najib tried to silence are out in force. They, and the law, have caught up with him.
Finally, when covering global news events, every so often an image appears that has iconic qualities. That's what happened in Sudan this past week when a young woman named Ala Salah went viral after a local photographer snapped a picture of her standing above a crowd of protesters in Khartoum, leading them. Those images seem to capture the central role that women have played in the anti-government demonstrations that have rocked the country since December and have now resulted in a military coup and the arrest of longtime President Omar al-Bashir. We'll leave you now with Ala Salah, her chants, and some of the tweets that viral video inspired. And we'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.